All right, let's get right to it because I'm obviously very fired up on this topic, and I want to talk to RJ Young, Fox Sports college football analyst, writer for Fox Sports, host of the #1 ranked show on foxsports.com, USFL columnist, covers the draft very well. So he's very involved in college sports. RJ, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you've heard any of my ranting and raving about this NIL drama, but to sum it up perfectly, I disagree strongly with everyone panicking about what's going on with NIL. But let's start with, maybe you can help me with this, because I can't seem to find the real problem with specifically NIL, not NIL and the transfer portal, because they are two separate issues that everyone is mushing together. The NIL, what is the problem? Like, what's the actual issue that the coaches are having with NIL?
It's the same problem that they've had for decades, which is boosters. In particular, what is and is not a booster? You know that the NIL guidelines came out earlier this week, and basically what they did was clarify what is a booster and what a booster is not allowed to do, which is to contact a player or a player's family or a player's representative with the intent of trying to induce them to come to a specific school based on a financial incentive. That is why people are losing their minds over NIL. The money is all over the place. We have so many different consortiums or collectives from alumni groups that have pooled their money together to try to attack that talent and try to get it into their schools.
So what regulations or, I guess, protocol do schools have to keep boosters from doing that? Because obviously we know coaches and academic institutions have great relationships with their boosters. It's not like they don't know who these people are. So have they had conversations with the boosters? Do the boosters know what the guidelines are? Or is this just boosters going rogue?
Well, it's not really the boosters that have to adhere to these things. It is the schools themselves, the administrators, who have to try to cut this off and or limit their access. And good luck with that, because you have a lot of donors at most major schools that want to meet and get to know the players. And you can't police their conversations, and you can't police their conversations with their parents. So I don't know that you're going to get a whole lot of back and forth between coaches and boosters about what they can and cannot do, because you'll also probably get into some other discussions about coaching philosophy that coaches don't want to simply go into. But you can have these educational opportunities where you bring in some alumni and say, hey, here's what you can do to help us. Please don't do these other things, and see what you get. But there is no real enforcement on this issue, and that is what the guidelines are supposed to lay the groundwork for. You're going to see the NCAA's enforcement arm go to work, such as it is, though, because they've had pandemic layoffs like many people have, where they're down to about 15 or 20 folks that are responsible for governing 1,268 member institutions. Good luck with that as you try to find major violations among these boosters and these collectives as it relates to NIL.
Right. So that's a great point. And we talked to Amy Dash earlier in the week, who brought up the legal side of this. Obviously, the NCAA is not a legal institution. They are not a government institution. They are a governing body over college sports, which is not specifically limited to college football or college basketball or male college basketball. This is for all student athletes from all of these institutions. So you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of student athletes. And you have what did they call it? A squad, an investigative squad. What was it? I can't remember the terminology that they used, but the point is, which you just brought up, there's not enough people. The NCAA doesn't have the capacity to enforce these guidelines. And even if they did, you're running into a task force, and they're running into the legal side of things. Each state has different guidelines for how they're going to prosecute. So how is the NCAA going to even enforce any of this?
Well, that remains to be seen. But what they had hoped was that the states themselves and perhaps even Congress would step in and take that ball away from them so that they don't have to try to enforce these NCAA rules as they would like to, because, as you said, they're not a government institution and they can open themselves up to antitrust legal suits, which I think is where we're headed with this. So let's say that your task force, thank you for finding that word, goes and investigates a school. And a school is found to be in major violation of these rules as it relates to what a booster did or did not do. Then if you try to level sanctions at that school or at perhaps that program, then you have to deal with those lawsuits that are going to come back at you. And maybe that's what you want if you are the NCAA, because then you get to pass it over to a judge who gets to tell you what they think you should do. But we already know what the Supreme Court thinks about this, because you'll remember last June, NCAA versus Alston, we found that the Supreme Court found out that the NCAA was operating as if it had some sort of monopoly and can't. And then you had Mark Emmert of the NCAA coming out with a statement saying, hey, we're going to allow NIL as it relates to these different states. Do what your state does. And if you're not violating any NCAA rules, we'll be okay with that. Now, 10 months after the fact, they are getting really just ravaged by their own administrators and their own coaches going, do something about this. And they're saying, our hands are tied. We really can't, but this is what we're going to attempt to do.
Talking to RJ Young, Fox Sports college football analyst. So I have an amateur suggestion for how to somewhat get this under control, to take it out of the student athletes' hands and actually out of the boosters' hands. You have to report, just like you do any other kind of income that you have, to the government. So the NCAA is the governing body over these student athletes in theory. So you report any NIL money that you have to your college. You have a specific office that you report this to. It's then their responsibility to account for it and then find out where that money came from and report that to the NCAA. So there is some sort of trail of where this money is coming from. And if it does get flagged because of a booster, then the college, not the student athlete, the college then has to deal with it. That to me is a way to keep track of the actual money and where it's coming from and have some sort of accountability. It shouldn't be on the student athlete to do that. And it shouldn't necessarily be on the boosters to do that. Because like you said, these are millionaires and billionaires. They don't care about the NCAA. They got their own lawyers. They're not worried about none of this. They're worried about winning. So to me, that's the only way to have some sort of control over the situation, some sort of documentation over what's happening with NIL. Because again, it's not just for college football players.
I think that's a very good idea. I also think you got to staff it, right? You're going to have to hire more people that are going to be able to do this legwork and this accounting. But I also think we're running into what I think of as an RJ problem, which is, hey, I used to do a lot of work to get through school and got paid in cash. There's no paper trail on my cash payments. There's nothing for me to report to anybody about my cash payments. And I'm not going to put it past most folks to try to find a workaround, if for no other reason than they would like to get this money directly to the source they would like to get it to. The other thing that I think we really need to investigate here is, if we did put into place some sort of apparatus for which you report all of your NIL deals, wouldn't we also want a players association for these student athletes, as they are? I just call them players. Perhaps even somebody that can bargain on their behalf. And perhaps you can even put in some guidelines and windows, like a transfer portal window, not unlike an NFL free agency. You can even have a franchise player at your program, or you can have a freshman rookie scale at your program. These are all things that I think could help the sport. Now, this also gets into the professionalization of the sport, which I've been on the train with for a very long time. I understand that a lot of folks are very much afraid of that, but I don't think that that's a big deal. I think that these players, whether they be football players, gymnasts, softball players, women's basketball players, lacrosse players, whatever, have a right to earn if somebody wants to pay them.
Well, yeah, that's the part that I agree with. And obviously the Supreme Court feels that way as well. You have a right to benefit off of the talents. And that's the whole point of college, is to better your life. So whether you're 18 or 24, you should be able to do that. And we should just be putting things in place to help guide them to success and financial stability and financial awareness at a younger age anyway. That's what an educational institution is supposed to do. Thank you so much for joining us, RJ. I knew you'd agree with me.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd, or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.